Hey everyone, we've got another fantastic cast interview for you today, but I just wanted to jump in with a quick apology before it rolls. Seems like my brain has at some point dropped out, and I completely forgot Morgan goes by they-them pronouns, and I totally misgender them a bunch during this interview, so massive apologies about that. I considered trying to edit over them or something, but it's just not really feasible in a way that wouldn't sound bad, and to be honest, I'd rather hold my hands up and take accountability for that. I have spoken to Morgan about this, and we're cool, but just wanted to be upfront about it now. But with that out of the way, on with the show with the brilliant KO. Welcome to Cybertopia cast interviews. This is KO Myers, who played Bludgeon in Cybertopia. KO, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about Bludgeon?
Sure. So, as Ben said, I'm KO Myers. I'm a freelance podcast producer, editor at particulatemedia.com. I have been playing Bludgeon over the course of this first season. No last name, as far as I can tell. He just seems to have adopted Bludgeon as a mononym. Bludgeon is, I described him at some point as a physical solution to every problem. He is a squat, muscly, fireplug-shaped guy who is just looking to apply physical pressure to any situation, which was interesting for me because I have recently taken a turn into playing more martial characters, and Bludgeon was, if not the first, then one of the very first characters where I was focusing on something physical, which was a bit of a challenge. I tend to be like, the wizard or the artificer or whatever who is balancing intelligence and those kind of mental scores with a physical aptitude, if any. So it was an interesting departure for me.
It's funny how he was set up, actually, because he was, like, as you say, a physical solution to every problem. He was basically a barbarian brute kind of character.
Mm-hmm.
But the first mission he went into was very much kind of a social deception, infiltration, heist kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And he immediately got into trouble with that.
Yes, which, my inner min-maxer was horrified, but the part of me that loves social roleplay was like, oh yeah, this is going to be hysterical. And it's really interesting. If you don't mind me going off on a little bit of a tangent, I've been thinking about this a lot. Like, one of the things that I really like about the system that you've designed is how flexible it is in terms of being able to respec the character, with certain things staying solid, but the other things are very malleable between missions depending on what you need for that mission.
Mm-hmm.
And I was approaching it very much from a D&D standpoint, where I was, trying to balance a party with a pugilist when everybody else that I was aware of seemed to have more social skills or more technical skills. Yeah. And very quickly realizing that that's not it's not the same. It's just not the same. It's not something that is as necessary. And so over the course of the season, I was sort of tweaking Bludgeon to try to make him still not wanting to shift too far away from the focus on being a bruiser, but trying to make him a little bit more useful, a little bit more precise, rather than just swinging wildly and punching things.
Yeah. No, I really liked it. I forget, there was a really fun phrase that I liked that you used as like core. I forget what it was.
Punchbot.
Punchbot, yeah. Yes. I keep on thinking beefcake. It wasn't beefcake. It was, Punchbot, yeah.
So Punchbot was his core. As one of his skills, I did take a +1 in what I called beefy, which was
that was it.
To kind of be a damage reduction.
Uh-huh.
Just representing him being a chunky boy. So,
and it was never that he was like super muscly as such. It was just he was a mass.
Right. Yes, he was. The pictures that you always see, this is what peak performance looks like. He was fairly strong, but it wasn't show-off muscle. It was just he's solid all over. So
mm-hmm.
I myself lift weights regularly, but not obsessively. And as I get a little stronger, it's been very nice. It helped with my life a lot, but the muscles underneath my belly are getting bigger and the fat over them isn't going away. And so
no.
I'm a lot stronger than I used to be, and I'm not any slimmer. My belly is, if anything, bigger than it used to be.
And I suppose it's not like being ripped. You don't have the bulging biceps and the rippling veins and shit, right?
No. Yeah, no. No ripples, no bulges. But I can carry 2 of the 3-gallon water jugs up the front stairs, one in each hand, and I don't have to stop. So
Nice.
it's
I
been
guess
really
it's for, I suppose, yourself and also for Bludgeon, it's an understated kind of muscliness. So he's not going and showing off and walking down the street and having people look at him and go, "Oh my god, he's enormous." Like,
right, yes. In my case, it's much more understated. It's more like muttered in the background rather than stated. But yeah, Bludgeon is definitely not. He's not a bodybuilder. He's not a comic book superhero. He's just a dude who has probably just living rough has managed to get pretty strong.
and he had a very pronounced mustache, from what I remember.
He did, yes. The bristly mustache, that came off the top of my head as we were describing the character in the first episode. It was like, what does he look like? And I had sort of pictured his shape and kind of, that he was bald. And then I thought, well, maybe it's a little bit like the old-fashioned strongman looking guy. And but I don't think he would have the patience to.
He wouldn't go full handlebars,
to wax it and curl it and everything. So it's just, it's just the straight dad mustache, but it's sort of bristly. But I think still a subject of pride for him.
Yeah. Was there any inspiration behind him, or it was just off the top of your head sort of thing? Because you also gave him a kind of like Eastern European Russian kind of accent, right?
Yeah, that also was very much in the moment. That is unfortunately. I have a tendency when I don't have a good voice planned, that sort of vaguely Slavic thing is what tends to come out.
Right. Do you have Slavic roots?
No. No, it seems to be an accent that I can do passively without thinking too much about.
That's so funny. My default is Cockney, but I'm from London, so that's kind of natural. But
Sure.
Slavic, okay.
It probably comes from watching a lot of action movies in the 80s where the bad guys were always vaguely Russian.
Yeah.
And so, that is something I just absorbed along the way. I took German in high school, which isn't exactly the same. It's in the ballpark, I guess.
I was kind of picturing Jean-Claude Van Damme sort of like thing. Although is he Belgian?
He's Belgian, yep.
Yeah. So you kept the theme throughout, for all 3 sessions that you played in. But he had various different roles. I guess in the first mission, the nightclub heist, he was kind of a distraction. In the second mission, he was kind of a breacher, like just get in and take on the biggest, baddest person there.
Right. So yes, in Hostile Takeover, he crashed the van through the security door and then wailed on the guard in there, basically.
Yeah. And then in the finale mission, I mean, it was very much set up to be a big fight. And you're in your element there, just kind of, again, one-on-one in someone there. And that was a really interesting fight because you were up against someone that wasn't all muscle.
Sure.
So, yeah, it was interesting seeing the balance, I guess, between that. It's not like a rock, paper, scissors kind of system. It's just you roll the dice and you have your modifiers that take into account whatever you happen to be doing. Do you have any favorite moments of Bludgeon throughout your sessions?
Well, actually, there's 2. In the first episode of Thieves in the Nightclub, when he was taking people in the bathroom to try to sort of distract them and had no real way to do that other than to knock them unconscious. He had incorporated, I think, his taser gloves at that point, so he was sort of shocking them into unconsciousness rather than beating them. But yeah, trying to convince them, hey, somebody's having trouble in the bathroom, come in here with me, and then they would immediately see through the ruse, and he's like, well, okay, I have to keep you in here. And
the physical solution to every problem really came to the fore very quickly.
So that was fun. And that episode in general, the foolishness on the dance floor was also...
It was a great intro to everything, right? Like, yeah.
Anytime Bludgeon got to interact with Zap was also on top of my list. But
I tell you what, in Hostile Takeover, you had some fantastic lines. When you were having that fight against the other big bruiser, and you're like, I've got a delivery for you.
Yes, come and sign for your package. That was my favorite. My nascent inner improv comedian was like, yeah, I nailed it.
No, those are brilliant moments. I really love that fight, that whole thing. And the rolls were just so on your side as well. Because every time I rolled, even when I rolled well, you somehow managed to roll better. No, it was really great scene, the whole thing in that loading bay, crashing in the chaos around it. Like, I
Mm.
could really imagine all those people just streaming past as you're just like, hi.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun with that. And again, because of the way the system is designed, it really is, I think, up to the DM. There isn't an innate attempt in the system, I think, to balance combat and social interaction. It's just sort of what the DM's preference is. But you did a great job of keeping a balance between social stuff and combat so that Bludgeon wasn't entirely useless. He got to flounder a little bit in the social settings, but then there were opportunities for him to shine in the combat. And I thought you did just a great job of making both of those things relevant to the story too.
I guess in the design of each of the missions, because I had these were pre-designed missions, all of them were written in the core book for Cybertopia from day one, before I even thought about doing the podcast. So they were all at least roughly based around those. And I built into all of the missions that it's a flexible system. The scenarios were set up to be also flexible, so you can approach them however you like. And there is always opportunity for social approaches, physical approaches, hacking approaches, or whatever technical stuff you want to do. So it's all possible. And I suppose doing an actual play of a game, a big part of it is making sure you showcase the characters and give people the spotlights to be able to either fail spectacularly or pull off something amazing. And you did both multiple times. So
felt like a good balance, yeah.
And I think that's probably the beauty of the system, right? Like, because when you fail, it isn't generally kind of beating down on you. Just it's a fun thing to then try to role play into or figure out a way around.
Right. Yeah. And as a GM, you have the opportunity, but also kind of the responsibility of helping the characters fail forward. And again, you did a great job of like, okay, you got a terrible roll and this consequence is going to happen to you. Some of which I think in the trauma system is really interesting. Like, it's built into the rules where if you fail badly, then it lingers and there's an effect, which I thought was a really interesting innovation. But also just in the immediate role play in the moment, you're improvising what happens. Because it is very easy to be like, well, you failed the roll, you fucked up, and and nothing good happens. But, having it either be, an interesting, funny moment and I think most of the case in the show, it was having it then advance the plot in some way.
Everything has to lead on to something. You never want to hit a brick wall. And even if you fail the roll, unlocking a door or something, that can still lead to a fun moment. You don't just get stuck and have to wait or whatever. So I suppose that's more of the part of the game running than the system itself. But I guess actually I forget what is exactly written in the book. I do have a section on game runner advice, and I talk about failing forward and keeping the plot moving, that sort of thing. I am planning on rewriting it at some point, so I have to make sure that I do have this stuff written into the advice, just so that people have the opportunity to keep a game from just floundering.
Sure.
So, I mean, you already mentioned Zap you enjoyed interacting with. Any other favorite characters or NPCs or anyone that you enjoyed and would like to see again?
It's hard to pick a favorite, but yeah, Zap was amazing. Morgan really leaning into that cyber sovereign thing.
Such a big character, right?
Oh, so big. And finding a way to leverage that core for just about every role.
Yeah.
Frankie was also really interesting.
I don't know if you listened to Valerie's interview.
Hay actually picked out Bludgeon. Hay was like,
I'd like to have interacted more with Bludgeon.
Well, it was a lot of fun for me watching Valerie and Morgan as Zap and Frankie just sort of being completely smitten by Zap and just willing to do anything that Zap said. That was fun. I think Basil was also a Clarity and the Whisper Drone. They were really interesting and fun. And Basil's just got a really, the delivery is kind of deadpan, but also kind of wry. And, figuring out, I'm going to go over to the power station and cut the power, but then turn it back on at a certain point was all really cool. So I
love the way Basil Z always had the drone then coming back in and checking on you and be like, oh no, everything's okay there. I'm just going to back out. Yeah, that was really
But I also really enjoyed the folks that I played with in the first episode, but Jeff in particular stood out as TMs in that episode, just doing all the dancing and, again, rolling high and rolling low and rolling with it no matter what, and using that as a way of keeping the attention of the room so that nobody was noticing what else was going on.
Yeah, I really enjoyed Jeff as a player and a character. Just had a way of keeping the action rolling and giving it over. It was like a hot potato in that mission of, here, you have it. You have the attention. I'm going to go and fail and do something else over there. Someone else come and pick up the pieces. That was great.
And then finger guns as our
yeah,
signal.
The finger guns was excellent. I'm sure the finger guns will be a lasting legacy for the show. So the finale was, like I said, a very much kind of straight up battle, or it was intended to be. I have always wondered, because everyone was very much compartmentalized in their various aspects of the finale, the four-parter, right? You guys, you were basically it was a combat session. And I always wondered if for the players that felt a bit boring.
You know, it's interesting because while it ended up being combat focused, we really tried. There was a number of attempts to like intimidate them, persuade them, pretend that we were up on the roof and, you know, guarding the place when everything.
I really wasn't expecting it. Yeah.
Yeah. So we, I think, took I don't even know if initiative is the right word, because that makes it sound more organized than it was, but we tried our damnedest to be like, all right, we want to get these people out of this room without fighting them. And we just were not convincing at all. And so then it turned into combat. So I don't think it was actually overwhelmingly all punching and kicking. So that helped it feel more interesting, because we did exhaust a couple of different opportunities. We're like, okay, we're going to try to influence these folks. And when that didn't work, which sort of felt natural, right? There's, I think, a very human, for most people at least, there's a human urge to say, if I could just start swinging, but because anytime you're fighting, you're also in danger. And I think very few people are just wading into a melee thinking, yeah, this is going to be great. I don't care how many hits I take. And so trying to avoid that and then be like, well, all right, shrug, shrug, punch, punch. But also, I think the opponents that we were fighting, all having their interesting skills and approaches to the battle. Somebody had a cloaking device and was invisible. Somebody was flinging knives and, being very sort of dexterity versus raw physical strength. It was varied enough. And again, the dice were telling interesting stories too. So all of those things combined, I think, made it interesting in a way. It didn't feel like it was just because I've been in those combats where it's like it takes you an hour to do 2 or 3 rounds of combat and it's just slogs and everybody's looking at their phones while they're waiting for their turn to come up. I've been in those combats and that didn't feel like that at all.
It can be the kind of system because every attack is a contested roll and the damage done is the difference between the defense and the attack. If everybody's rolling well, it can end up with very small amounts of damage done each time and it can drag out. But for some reason, I've never really had a situation, even during playtesting and other sessions that I've played of this, it never ends up being that way. The dice just like to have big rolls and big differences and massive catastrophes. And it's always seemed to have worked out. It's interesting the way you describe how you came in with the approach, because Amazing Corp's directions was always supposed to be very much, you are assassins, go in and assassinate these people, but none of you were really into that. None of you were super bloodthirsty, kind of get in there, kill the people. And then even when you get into the action of the combat, it didn't actually last all that long.
No.
And then you had a really great ending scene to it, where you had the last guy that was left bleeding out on the floor, and you're kind of half interrogating him, half trying to help him, trying to get him on side or whatever. And that led to some really brilliant roleplay. I enjoyed that from the whole group.
And then you pulled the rug out from under all of us and had Amazing Corp betray us.
Yeah.
You naughty, naughty DM.
How did you feel about that?
Well, it was so interesting. because it was a very different experience because we recorded them all individually and then you sort of wove them together in the editing. And so hearing it happen at the table, in quotes, and we were the ones with, well, I guess maybe everybody, we had the earpieces and it was Zap was the first one to say, oh, wow, this is turning red. I'm going to throw it away. And so while Bludgeon, I don't think made that connection, I was very much listening to Morgan and going, oh yeah, that does sound like something bad is going to happen. And so it had a few moments to be ominous before the trigger got pulled. So that was really interesting. And then to hear it happen across all of the groups and the different ways that they were participating in setting it up, the robots in the basement that were going to blow up the whole building. It was really fascinating to hear it, even though I knew what was going to happen. Listening to it happen, listening to how it was set up and how it came together was really fun.
Did it feel weird when you were actually playing? When that moment happened of, oh, suddenly you're just blown up. I'd imagine as a player that feels a bit like being cheated out of the success. Like, oh, you've done your mission, but you're just getting blown up. And because you didn't have any context at that moment of why or how.
Well, yes. And it was very narrative. It made sense, I guess, in the universe. And because you did foreshadow it with the earpieces, it didn't feel like it came out of nowhere. You know, it wasn't like you were, I've seen, and I've probably been guilty of doing this, GMs where, you know, you get into a boss fight and the party is just whomping on the big bad. And you're like, well, okay, I don't want them to kill this character at this stage of the adventure, so I'm going to have lightning strike them or an earthquake or a volcano. It's like something terrible happens and the bad guy gets away. Yeah, you know. It felt like a narrative choice, something that you had planned, and it was a great way to move us into the next chapter of the story that'll happen in season 2. So for the character and for me too, it felt like being betrayed, but in a narratively interesting way. And so I didn't feel angry about it.
Okay. Right, so speaking about moving on into season 2, how do you think Bludgeon is going to feel about all of this? You've already said he felt betrayed instantly.
Sure.
His immediate response, I suppose, on coming to in the future at some point, I assume will be physical response to every action.
You know, I think yes, and I think there is a lesson in this for Bludgeon that he is probably going to be a little more strategic. Being so focused on, I'm going to go in and get the job done in as brutally efficient a manner as possible, put him in the position of not really thinking about what could happen if things went sideways.
He's going to be a bit less of a soldier and a bit more thinking about things.
I think, yeah, he will, being deliberate about being better prepared, he will be more deliberate about trying to understand both the mission and also the team that he's on, assuming we all end up working together again. I don't think he's necessarily suspicious of everybody else because they also got blown up together. But, you know, anytime he's working with someone who's hiring him, there's going to be more caution. And he is very much going to be looking for opportunities to figure out who betrayed them and get back at them. I think he's going to be driven by vengeance, or at least evening the score.
Do you think he'd go out to try and get hired or join a larger group or another company or something? Or do you think he'd go kind of freelance and try and stay out of groups now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think his main focus would be on trying to build up his individual reputation, maybe even under an alias, because he would assume that Amazing Core has the resources. If they figure out that he's not dead, that they might come after him again. So there is a certain amount of safety in a group and also potential resources in terms of both, you know, the physical and cybernetic mods and just intelligence gathering that he would not be able to do on his own. But I think his immediate priority would be building up his physical strength and his skills and getting some kind of reputation burnishing. He wouldn't want to just show up at mob headquarters and be like, hey, I can punch things. He would want to come in with a certain amount of awareness or reputation so that he could have access to the benefits that they offer rather than just being a gopher.
Yeah, I think you used a really kind of pertinent word back there of deliberate. And yeah, that feels like it will be a kind of guiding principle for him from now on. So that'll be interesting to see how that comes out in play. One of the things I'm planning to do for season 2 is to have you have more sessions and more structured in terms of you will be with the same group for like 4, 5, 6 sessions maybe. And then you get to develop some interpersonal relationships with the other characters, have yourself a
Sure.
little arc of your own and stuff, and I guess see how Bludgeon grows into that more deliberate mindset. With that in mind, I don't know how many, if any, of the other episodes you listened to that you weren't in. Do you recall any of the other characters that you thought Bludgeon would get on really well with, or conversely not get on well with?
It's interesting. So I did listen to I've listened up through the Festmas episode. I was thinking of the other thing that I'm guilty of, I think, with Bludgeon was thinking of him in terms of being very plug and play. He didn't have a rich inner life or a lot of strong motivations that would put him in conflict with other characters. I was sorry that I didn't get to interact with Buran at all. Obviously, I've played with Jen in other settings, so I would be super happy to get to work with her.
Jen is fantastic to play with. Like the Encore stream that you were doing with Ampersand, that was great. And yeah, Jen is ridiculous fun.
And smart, cool man, too. I mean, the denim tuxedos, just that whole vibe was very cool. So I would. Yeah. But yeah, I think going forward, Bludgeon is now going to have this sort of ember of resolve in his heart of he needs to figure out what happened and then get back at the people who did this to him. And so assuming that the other characters have a similar goal, I think he's going to be open to working with any of them.
It's been a fairly common theme in the responses to these questions of like, yeah, we're going to get revenge somehow. I assume that's probably going to be the case with everyone. So Bludgeon, very much a follower rather than a leader. Do you think there's anyone within the player characters that he would naturally look to as a leader?
I mean, I think Zap has to be at the top of that list. I think I was starting to feel like maybe Bludgeon was attracted to Zap in a way that was sort of about the personality and the swagger, but also about the all of the showiness and the force of personality that Bludgeon just doesn't have. And so I think there was an interest there just in being around Zap.
They're very much a power figure, right?
Yes.
That is my own feeling towards this. I haven't done Morgan's interview yet, so it'll be really interesting to see how she feels about all of this. You could tell when she was playing as Zap, she was really just having a whale of a time. So I expect that that'll probably continue. It'll be interesting to see how she feels like Zap will react to all of this in season 2.
TM's also very charismatic and seemed to know what was going on and be able to strategize, I think. So that would be something that Bludgeon would be attracted to. And also, I think Clarity is a dark horse candidate there as well, because Clarity is, again, smart and observant. And
they were quite, quiet, right, as a character, but they were very, I don't know, not focused, deliberate, I suppose is probably a word for it. Like they had their thing and they knew what they were doing and they thought about things rather than just, I'm going to crash the van in.
They didn't necessarily just go charging into a situation, but they were also willing to enable a charge-in situation if it looked like it was going to be a strategic advantage. And so I think, Bludgeon definitely respects Clarity and would be inclined to follow Clarity's advice or suggestions. I don't see Clarity wanting to give orders necessarily, but maybe.
Maybe there'd be kind of a companion or like a buddy character to team up with Bludgeon again in the future.
Maybe.
So, you mentioned Buran. It's a shame that Ray pulled out before the finale and wasn't able to see a full arc for Buran and the mech. I really enjoyed having the mech as a thing in the game because I'd never really envisaged that as something for the system, but it really kind of worked. And I hope that we can bring in more mechs in future. You said you listened to the stream specials that came after the finale. So I put a whole hanger of mechs in one of those just because I wanted to do mechs. And that was a lot of fun. So I'm sure Amazing Corp has mechs. There are mechs in the world. It is canon. So there will probably be more in season 2. One of the things of season 2 is, as well as giving you your longer arcs and more stable groups, I'm going to make it very much player-led. So you're going to get to decide what you do when you come out of the rubble of that building and where you go, what threads you want to follow or pick back up. With that in mind, do you have any loose ends that you would like to see followed up?
Well, I think that the obvious first choice would be to try to get some more intel about the underground and the other
factions.
because I think Bludgeon would now think, well, okay, everything I know about these people has been filtered through what Amazing Core told me, and they told me I was a valued employee. So maybe there's other things they haven't been super honest about. So I think, yeah, wanting to sort of figure out what those factions are actually doing and their relationship with each other. But the big loose end that hopefully connects to the entire sweater is partway through the series of missions, the original support staff that we had, the original AI and the person who was there, they disappeared too. And then there was a new sort of military general sounding person who was giving us our orders and like talking about shutting down the division or whatever. And so, yeah, was there a change of leadership that caused this reversal on us? Getting to the bottom of where that comes from, and do we have to burn down Amazing Core entirely, or is there some rogue person who was put in charge?
Just a bad apple kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Although some of that is me being metagamey about it. Bludgeon would be first wanting to recover from any injuries, connect with as many of the people who went into the building at the same time as he did and make sure they're alive, take care of sort of the immediate physical shelter, food, all that jazz.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, just trying to...
And I suppose, like you said, I mean, if he's going to be more deliberate in future, then it makes sense that he would try to find out more information rather than thinking he can just go and punch a corporation.
Mm-hmm.
He may think it through a bit more and be like, no, you cannot punch a business.
No. I mean, this is America. We hardly ever punish businesses for anything. So it's the joke about I'll believe that corporations are people when we execute one. But yeah, no, that's a very good point. But I think it also is going to have to start with, when I said reputation building before, I wasn't really thinking about it, but it occurs to me now that if any of the members of these factions who were in the building at the time also survived, they're going to have very clear memories of these people did this to us. And so having to figure out a way to either disguise themselves or earn the trust of the factions as a sort of, we now have a common enemy.
Yeah.
Sorry, we killed your boss.
I guess that's probably going to be something that comes up fairly early in the season, of the people that pulled you out of that rubble have already identified you as not being members of those factions.
Right.
How does that resolve and how does that continue? Will be a interesting thread to pull on and see where that goes. Something else that I'm planning before we get into season 2 is a bit of a world building, city building, and faction building kind of game where we will have probably like 4 or 5 of you at a time playing and developing the lore about various factions within the city. So you've had experience with these other 3 factions, the ACM, the Underground, and the Free Earthers. Their leadership has just been killed. The leadership's entourages have just been killed. The factions themselves aren't completely destroyed during that, but they're definitely going to have been splintered, and there's going to be a lot more of other factions that may come up or fill the voids or splinter off from those. So where we end up with in the state of the city in terms of the anti-Amazing Corp groups could be all over the place, and you may find that you identify with one group or another. Maybe Bludgeon will find his way into a boxing group or something. You never know. Like, maybe there is a mob in town. These are things that I've not defined, and I have done some kind of world lore in the background, but it's pretty loose and flexible. So I don't know if you remember the Signs of the Times episode where the team that went into that basically defined a whole bunch about that particular neighborhood and like invented a bowling alley and a 90s themed diner and what was it, hover hockey and stuff. So yeah, I look forward to hearing what nonsense you all come up with and the way you shape this world and then go about destroying it from when you actually get into playing. So
yes, shout out to the hover hockey hooligans. They were hysterical. Morgan, if you're listening to this, the leadership of these factions has all just been destroyed. So maybe there is room for a god person Zap, and they will need a bodyguard. And maybe Basil as their tech support. Nox could contribute there too. Maybe we go straight to the top.
Wait, form your own faction.
Well, no, I mean, even take over one of the ones
right, okay.
Because presumably they still have some infrastructure and staff in place, but they have a leadership vacuum, which, you know, nature apparently abhors. So Zap has got the charisma to step in. I'm just saying, a couple of good cyber sovereign
Well, and I
roles
guess like Mark as Sir Ingram already has a kind of a tea cult as well following. So
very true. Yeah.
There's definitely some wiggle room there for developing your own Maybe you could bring those 3 factions that you met there together under yourselves.
Maybe. Yeah, that's an
Who's to
interesting
say?
idea.
We shall see.
Which is another interesting point, speaking to the idea that as they pull us out of the rubble, they will have identified us as not being part of those factions. At the same time, different members of the groups were fulfilling different roles that will be seen as directly antagonistic. Like anybody who had eyes on Bludgeon is going to know, yeah, Bludgeon was killing people.
I suppose for Bludgeon, it was literally only the leadership that saw them. So
yeah, that's true.
They're all dead.
The folks who were downstairs having the dance party and the...
That was so ridiculous.
Like
so fucking ridiculous. It was amazing. Yeah, I guess they were all seen, but they were never identified by those people down there as being weird or off.
Exactly. They were never made as Amazing Core, so they have plausible deniability to say, yeah, we were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, too. So that'll be interesting to think. I don't know if Bludgeon would be smart enough to say, how did I get here? When they ask who he is and how he got there, that he would be smart enough to come up with an answer that isn't, I came to kill your boss. Like, how was I on the roof of this building and then fell down into the rubble? Yeah, that'll be interesting.
Maybe he could genuinely just not know or remember. He's just like, what were you doing there? I don't know. I mean, you would have been buried in rubble. You could have taken several knocks to the head. These things are possible. So something else I'm going to do for season 2, right, is you're going to have dramatically reduced skill and item points. You'll still have your core that you can kind of define yourself, but you don't have access to Amazing Core facilities anymore. You don't have their download guilds. You don't have their armory.
Okay.
What would be the signature things for Bludgeon that you'd want to be keeping for him?
Interesting. So let me ask you this. So, like, will we still have the skills that we kind of downloaded for the last mission? I mean, I'm assuming our gear is probably all trashed, but will some of that be...
I think probably what I'll say is that, like, the damage that has been done to yourselves will have downgraded at least some of your stuff.
Okay.
What I'm saying here is you get to keep some of it if you want.
Okay.
In terms of skills as well, because maybe you've taken a few knocks to the head and some of those skills have just dropped out.
Okay. Interesting. In that case, there's no reason that Bludgeon shouldn't just start learning how to tap dance. Yeah. Do a little Sabian Glover in the rubble.
It was in there all along.
Right? Yeah. Or maybe he suddenly knows how to play the violin. I think that, I mean, with the punch bot core and having the punching skill is maybe a little bit redundant, but I think, keeping the beefy as sort of representative of this is how he survived a building falling on him.
Makes sense.
In terms of the gear, though...
The thing I really love, when you decided you were going to swap out the taser glove for a tentacle gauntlet, the tentacle gauntlet is chef's kiss. Love that.
Thank you. Well, maybe I'll leave that up to you just and then see if it got trashed in the collapse or not. But I think he would love to have those because they were pretty versatile, if they still work or not. But I think, most of the skills were sort of, I did have one point in him being sort of sneaky, but it's hard. That's tough. What I would keep for, I think, I mean, at the end of the day, he's going to be trying to be more deliberate and careful, but he is still, his go-to is going to be, I'm going to square out my shoulders and push my way through this.
I suppose it's important to also consider, like, it's not the state that you're in with the reduced skills and items is not necessarily permanent, in that you will have the opportunity to go out into the world and try and find new items and try and develop new skills, and you'll still have the learning structure, and anything that you got from learnings through Nat 20s are going to stay with you. So I can't remember. Actually, I don't think you were one of the people that got a lot of crits either way in the whole season, right?
No, I don't think I'm not sure I got...
I don't remember you getting any traumas.
I know I didn't get enough for a learning, and I'm almost sure I didn't have a trauma, or if I did have a trauma, it didn't last very long.
Yeah.
So, I didn't experience that part of the system really that much. In that case, I think if you're asking what would Bludgeon be trying to add back into his skill set, I think maybe, especially that last fight, will have shown him that maybe there is some value in being able to dodge rather than just stand there and take all of the punishment. So maybe
if I remember correctly, actually, you grabbed the electric baseball bat off the guy, right? You caught it in your hand, I think, did you?
Yes, that was the tentacle gloves coming in handy. So
maybe I'll allow you to keep that, because you did kind of disarm the guy with it.
Yeah.
And that was a very cool weapon. That was actually a +3 weapon. That was the only +3 thing in the whole season.
Yeah, well, I was inspired. What can I say? But yeah, I think Bludgeon would be thinking about, okay, I have his training up till now, I picture being very just sort of boxy, punch hard, some basic blocking, trying to protect his head particularly, but not evading, dodging, redirecting, that sort of thing. And so I think he would probably be looking to learn some of those skills. He's never going to be, Batman proficient, but
yeah,
maybe just being able to occasionally dodge a blow rather than just take it to the forearms, I think would be on his mind.
Maybe go a bit more MMA than just straight boxing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Fair. Okay, it feels like we're getting kind of ready to see the end here. Why don't you tell us a bit about what you do outside of Cybertopia? Where can we find you? And what can we expect to see from you in the future?
Sure. So I'm really looking forward to season 2 of the Cybertopia AP. I am also in the process, like you said, with Ampersand D20 of turning the Cybertopia stream that we were working on into a Cybertopia podcast, although that setting is a little bit different. And so it's going to be interesting to see how the two differ from each other.
If I remember correctly, it's set far into the future from the current day, isn't it?
That was the vibe I got, although I'm not sure yet. We haven't quite nailed down, because the podcast isn't going to be a direct continuation of the stream.
Yeah.
And so I don't know exactly how that shakes out in the reboot, essentially.
Yeah.
But yes, in the original, it did seem to be like much further in the future.
It's kind of an altered carbon kind of vibe to it. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that would be cool to see. And it is great to have other people also making a AP with this system.
Oh, I'm sure.
As much as 2 of the players are also from this AP. It's really good to see that.
What can we say? We find a system we like and we stick with it. So I'll be doing that. I am also on the Last Omnitect does a system.
Are you on that?
I am. Every other Saturday on his Twitch channel, The Last Omnitect, it's called Legacy First Flight. It is also an original sci-fi system, but it is much more space opera, exploration, that kind of thing. I've just joined that at the end of last year, and I'm really having a good time with it. I am working on a podcast project taking the old TSR Gamma World system, which is sort of a post-apocalyptic radiated wasteland, mutant plants and animals kind of thing.
Cool.
And updates it to be more in line with the D&D 5e rules.
Okay.
So we're working on an actual play of that. And then otherwise, I mostly help other people launch podcasts. I'm helping some friends put together a podcast about Star Trek Enterprise, and I have clients who are mostly small businesses and entrepreneurs who are podcasting as part of their outreach, whether that's marketing or just generally having a resource that they can share with both folks who couldn't necessarily afford to hire them full-time. So
had you done APs before Cybertopia?
I have done a handful, nothing long-term. I played a Deadlands one-shot a while back.
I've not played Deadlands. It seems like a really cool system.
It was fun, yes. That was how I met Murder Veggie, who is also another Twitch streamer who I enjoy. And with Zeal Zaddy, I did their Zibble Zabble Theater, which was the puppet.
Oh, cool.
We did a one-shot of that, which is how I got to know Matt from Roleplay Chat.
But Cybertopia was, I guess, even though it was only 3 sessions, it was your first kind of long-form campaign-style AP.
I think so, yeah. Oh God, I'm so afraid I'm forgetting something, and I'm gonna feel terrible when somebody pops up and says, "You were on my thing."
We played for 5 years, KO.
Well, that's part of the challenge, right? Is I mostly DM and I mostly play D&D 5e, and so because of scheduling and groups coming in and out, it is very hard for me to keep track of all the games I've got going. And so the actual plays tend to blend into that morass of all these games. And so, yeah, I do sometimes have trouble keeping track of it. But Cybertopia was definitely really my first sci-fi TTRPG since I played Twilight 2000, which is sort of post-nuclear apocalypse, so not even super sci-fi. I played some Rifts in college, which very much had a sci-fi mashup kind of vibe. And then I did dabble a little bit when they released the Spelljammer setting for 5e. I dabbled in that a little bit, but I haven't really played a straight-up sci-fi game until this, and so it was fun to flex those muscles too. And it was definitely my first sci-fi actual play as well, and I've really enjoyed it. I'm sort of trying to move more in that direction of doing more actual plays. Don't tell me where that leads. I'm sure.
I know the feeling, dude. Yeah.
But it's fun, and I enjoy most of the time I get the opportunity to be a player rather than a GM in those settings, and so I like flexing that muscle too.
Yeah, so you said earlier, right at the start, that Bludgeon was your first kind of foray into playing martial characters. What is your preference before that? And how has it been going since with other martial characters?
You know, like I said, I mostly played characters who were more strategic, had more options. Wizards and artificers and druids occasionally, clerics, rogues. I went through a streak where it was lots of rogues. And yeah, since then, the character that I'm playing in the Legacy stream with The Last Omnitect is very much a frontline beat-em-up tank kind of fighter. And I'm having fun with that. It's really helped me kind of evolve as a GM, thinking more about what the roleplay options are in combat.
Yeah.
That's always been an aspiration, but thinking more about it from a character standpoint than helping my NPCs in games that I run to inject more role-playing into the combat has been helpful. And there are ways to be smart and strategic and make interesting roleplay choices when you're swinging a sword, just like there are when you're casting spells.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's cool. I'm really excited to see this new side of Bludgeon come out in season 2, see how he's going to interact with the other player characters and other non-player characters and get into the world. I think it's going to be really great to see that.
And maybe hopefully he'll find some +1 tap shoes along the way.
Yes, we'll see. Yeah, Tim's would be all over that. So yeah, have a word. Yeah. So finally, where can we find you online, socials and all that stuff?
I am on Blue Sky and Mastodon, and I think I still have an X account. Those are all under Thunksit, THUNKSIT. I don't check any of them with any frequency, but you can find me there.
And social media is such a minefield these days. Yeah,
it really is. Yeah, the way it's splintered has been fascinating. And now that Blue Sky is open to the public, it is very rapidly turning into Twitter, unfortunately. And then my website is particulatemedia.com. I help people launch podcasts. Editing is kind of my main thing, but I help people develop descriptions and cover art and theme music and get it all lined up if they want to launch a podcast or if they have a podcast already and they want someone to take over some of that technical work. I do that too. I'm a freelance producer, editor, and that's what I do for my day job. So I'm definitely interested in getting involved in more actual plays from that standpoint as well. So if anyone listening has an actual play project that they have been putting off because they don't want to handle the logistics or the technical stuff, check out particulatemedia.com and maybe I can help you out.
Yeah, I wish I had the funding to be able to do that because, oh boy, it is a pain in the ass. It's funny, actually, I don't know. It's a bit of a love-hate relationship. I don't know how you feel about it personally. It's your job. But for me, it's kind of a bit of a happy place when I've had a shit time at work. And I will enjoy having a good edit session for an hour or so in the evening or whatever. But then sometimes it just drags. Sometimes you just hit a wall and I don't know. I guess it's almost like writer's block kind of thing. And you're just trying to edit and it's just not coming together. Yeah.
You know, my experience, editing isn't just one thing. When you're just going through and cutting out ums or shortening pauses, that can get really repetitive. But there are other times when you're like, okay, this phrase makes sense and the phrase after it makes sense, but then there's a bunch of stuff in the middle that I don't really need. Let me pull that stuff out in the middle. And when it gets seamlessly and you can't tell there was anything there in the middle,
that feels great.
Is great. Yeah. There's also one of the things that I offer for my clients is it's not just cutting and pasting. There's a certain amount of narrative sense that I've developed over the years. And so when a concept makes sense in one place, but makes even more sense at a different place, picking up a section, moving it around, splitting it up and sprinkling it into other dialogue or voiceover to make it flow more narratively, that's really satisfying.
I tell you what, with the way that I spliced together the 4 parts of the finale, it was a massive challenge. But figuring out how to put those little jigsaw bits together and how long to make each section to make it sound good in a podcast that is going to be an hour-long episodes and stuff.
Yeah.
I don't even know how to describe it. It is a
it
massive
makes my brain
challenge.
happy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And it's a lot more creative than it sounds because you are thinking, okay, I've got all these elements of a story and I need to arrange them in the right order. And once it clicks, you have a narrative that flows. Yeah, it feels really good.
And then like a week later, you decide, actually, no, I'm going to move that other bit round again and arrange stuff. Yeah.
The benefit of doing it the way I do it is that I always have another client with another deadline. So I don't have too much time to go back and think,
Yeah.
what could I have improved with this? Like, it is as good as it's going to get. And I like to think that that is fairly good, but I don't have time to let the perfect be the enemy of the good in that context.
Yeah, good for you, man. Cool. Well, it's been great chatting to you, man.
Yeah.
Really looking forward to season 2 and all the other stuff that we got coming up. I am also looking forward to hearing what happens with Ampersand and the other podcasts that you're making.
Thank you for having me as part of the cast. It was a blast. And thank you for doing this. I really enjoyed chatting with you as well.